What's up, fam? Just Ramon here. Today, I'm going to talk about something that's really heavy on my heart, but it's a real issue, and it's an issue that a lot of us deal with, and it's called collateral punishment. But I want to reiterate, I'm going to go back over the story just so you'll know what happened. I went to Ohio Means Jobs to get funding for the CDL program, and I couldn't get the funding for the CDL because of my traffic violations. Right? It was a lot of things that I had to do in order to qualify to be able to be funded. And all of this information was being submitted to a funding committee. And the funding committee would review my application. I jumped through all of these hoops for them. And they gave me 2 weeks to do everything that I needed to do. And they was like, yeah, it usually takes around, 2 weeks or so, like a week or so. I did what they wanted me to do within 2 days. And when I got back to my counselor and was like, here's what, the research and here's the answers to the essay questions, they were like, wow. Right. And so I was like, okay, it's cool. I was like, I just want to go to school, and I'm showing you that I'm willing to put in the effort and I'm to do whatever it takes to go to school. My counselor and her supervisor, they have told me that, like, you have shown us that you were driven. They ask us for our opinion. We recommended that you get the funding. And so I'm going into this optimistically thinking that I'm going to get this funding. Well, they had their meeting Friday, and I get a call from my counselor, and she says, she's like, I got good news, bad news. Which one do you want first? So I'm like, bad news. And she was like, well, they didn't say no. I was like, oh, here we go. Right? And I was like, okay. She said, but the good news is, like, they want you to do something. They want you to find a company that's willing to write a letter saying that they will consider hiring you. Not that they want to hire you or they intend to hire you, but at least that they will consider hiring you upon completion of the program. And they wanted to list that they know that you are a convicted felon and what your convictions are. And I was like, what? And now, mind you, I start school in 2 weeks. Like, it's not even 2 weeks. It's like 9 days or something. And I was like, I said, well, why didn't they ask me that from the beginning? I could have did that when I was doing my research. I could have reached out to companies, and she was like, but this is what they're asking you to do. You just got to jump through one more hoop. I was doing my research. I reached out to the director of the HVAC program, the dean of the HVAC program at Stark State. He helped me get in because one of the classes I wanted to take was full. And he helped me clear that hurdle by okaying them to add me into the class. Even though the class was full, he was like, no, I want him to be in the class. So I know that he's an advocate because he had told me about the potential employers. They're always coming around and they want to hire the guys that are graduating. They come through and try to get the pick of the litter. So I called him and I told him about the situation. We can write that letter because we consider every graduate that comes out of it. He said, no, I'm not guaranteeing you can get a job, but we at least will consider you. And I said, okay. I said, well, could you write that letter for me? And he was like, yeah, man. Like, he was like, well, I can't write it, but I could take it to our advisory board and we'll figure something out, and we'll try to get that to you, right? So I said, okay, cool. And I felt positive about that, but I didn't want to leave it at that. And so my cousin, she had an HVAC lady come out to her house and fix her air conditioning. I told her what the situation was, and she was like, you want me to reach out to that HVAC lady? Maybe she could help. And I was like, absolutely, yes. So I got in contact with her, and turns out that she went through Ohio Means Jobs. But instead of going to Stark State, she went to this it's like a training center that she went through. And I told her about the situation, and she was like, they didn't make me do that. And I was like, really? Huh. I told her where I was located, and she said, well, my brother-in-law works in North Canton. He has a business in North Canton. Let me reach out to him and see what he says, and I'll get back to you. I'm like, all right, so now I got two possibilities. Then I went to work, I work at the church, and I talked to the executive pastor about the situation and said, hey, anybody that has, a company, like a HVAC company that would be willing to consider hiring me. And he was like, yeah, I know somebody right now. He's like, I got you. And he shot an email the next day or so. They got right back to me, had a conversation with the owner of the company. And he was like, absolutely. Like he was like, dude, like, yeah, I got you. And he wrote the letter pretty much while we were on the phone and emailed it to me. I called my counselor. I sent her, I had already sent her, and I tell my counselor, I was like, hey, you might want to check your email. There's something that you might find interesting. And she was like, I knew that you could do it. I knew it. She was like, if anybody could, I knew that you could. She's like, I just know. She said, I believe in you. And I was like, okay. She said, well, it'd be great if you could talk to the head of Stark State again, and maybe I'd love to take two letters to the advisory committee. That would really show them. And I was like, you know what? That's a good idea. So I reached out to the head. His name is Steve. So I reached out to Steve and I was like, hey, Steve, I told him what the situation was. And he was like, well, oh, man. He's like, man, unfortunately, I've got some bad news for you. And I was like, what's going on? And he says, well, I gave that letter that you sent, the letter that the committee, the funding committee gave you. I gave that to our advisory committee, and they ran it past everybody, and everybody said the same thing, was that no, they wouldn't consider you. And I was like, excuse me? And he was like, yeah, we got our advisory committee is made up of some of the potential employers, and they all said that their insurance, because you'll be going to residential areas or commercial areas, that their insurance wouldn't cover you or something to that effect. And they all said, no, they won't consider you. And so we couldn't get the letter written. And I was like what? And I'm like, they won't even consider me. And he was like, man, unfortunately, he's like, I know. He said, I really feel for you. He says, you're out here, you're trying to do the right thing. He says, but they just said with your history, man, that they just wouldn't consider you their insurance. And I was like, I said, so what happens when the next guy comes with this situation? I said, and this is where I was thinking about the term collateral punishment. Is collateral punishment means I've done my time. I committed a crime. I went to court. I got sentenced. I went to jail. I served my time. I came out and I'm doing the right thing, right? I've served my sentence. I've paid my debt to society. And here it is now that because of the crime that I committed, which, by the way, was 25 years ago. 25 years ago is when I was convicted. You're telling me that you won't even consider hiring me, meaning you won't even look at me because I'm a convicted felon. That is a classic example of collateral punishment. I am still being punished for a crime that I committed 25 years ago and paid my debt for, and they won't even consider me.